The most common case I see is it's a clear liability accident. They have an attorney from the very beginning. They go to a chiropractor. Within 3 weeks or so, they're ordering MRIs, which is really early in a case to order MRIs. Then they're getting referred to pain management. They're getting injections, and the injections are costing between $10,000 and $20,000 per injection, including the surgery center. And then they're getting get a doctor who says that they're a surgical candidate. That's the most common cases that I'm seeing.
From my perspective, if that person truly is a surgical candidate, that's fine. And if they are not, and it's being done to drive the value in the case, that's awful.
Well, and that's my job to figure out which ones I think are legitimate and which ones we have to fight.
Yeah.
I mean, that's part of what I have to do.
Yeah. Howdy, and welcome to the show. Cooper's Code focuses on legal issues and notable practitioners, distilling wisdom so we all achieve the best results for our clients. I'm Miles Cooper, and I'm very excited for this conversation with Peter Kirk. Peter is a career claims representative with decades of experience helping manage risk and assess the value of claims made. We explore the claims process, what makes and breaks claims, ironing out communications and misunderstandings between plaintiffs' lawyers and the carriers, and what it looks like when one side or the other miscalculates the risk. Peter sees his claims all the way through. He's been to over 50 trials to watch the outcome when the sides were unable to reach settlement, and has come to know more than just a little bit about how juries look at cases. So please sit back and enjoy this conversation with Peter Kirk. Welcome to the show, Peter.
Hey, it's a pleasure to be here. I'm a big fan of the Cooper's Code podcast. I think you do a great job.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I was really excited when your name came up, because we've never had somebody in your role on the show, and we like to keep things fresh. And so I'm really appreciative that you're willing to come on. I want to make sure that we cover at the very beginning that while you work in the claims world, that you are here in your individual capacity, and any opinions or any views, anything you share with us is in an individual capacity, not on behalf of any company that you have worked for. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. I think we covered that appropriately, that the corporate governance people at your insurance company will be satisfied. But with that, I typically go chronologically, and I'd love to get a little bit about who you are and what brought you into the claims world.
Well, a little bit about maybe where I grew up.
Yeah.
I grew up in San Francisco, one of 7 kids.
Wow.
My mom and dad met in college. My mom grew up in St. Paul. She came out to California to go to Stanford. My dad went to Menlo College next door. He had grew up in Montana till 12, then moved to San Jose. And then my mom moved back to Washington, D.C. after she graduated. My dad was went into the Marines and as an officer. And then they eventually got married. And my 3 older siblings were born, I believe, in Indiana, Washington, in the East Bay. And then they bought a house in San Francisco on the Ingleside. And that's where I grew up. My mom and dad got divorced when my youngest sister was a baby. My dad was an alcoholic. And that was when my mom was 39. She went back to school at USF and got her teacher credential. And for 25 years, she supported all of us as a single mom, as a high school librarian and teacher down in the Daly City and Pacific area. My dad, unfortunately, at age 46, passed away from cirrhosis of the liver. So we were a very close family, but it was just me and my 6 siblings and my mom.
I'm sorry you went through that experience. It sounds like she must have been, or is she still with?
No, she passed away 15 years ago.
It sounds like she must have been an amazing person to take all that on.
She was, and family was everything to her. So whatever we were doing, we were always getting invited for all the different events, birthdays, holidays, everything. She always wanted us to be together. And she always made a real point and sacrificed a lot for all of us so that we would have a good life growing up in San Francisco.
The San Francisco question always is, where did you go to high school?
I went to Lincoln High School in the Sunset. When I was going to school and growing up, the public schools in San Francisco were not great, and they also had forced busing. So I was forced to go from 4th, 5th, and 6th grade all the way out to near the Cow Palace to a school called Guadalupe.
Okay.
But I ended up going to Lincoln for 4 years, graduating from Lincoln. And when I was at Lincoln, I played high school basketball my junior year and my sophomore year. And then I ran cross country and track in 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. I quit playing basketball after my junior year because I came to the realization that I was a much better runner than basketball player. We had a very, very good team. I think my junior year, we started out 17-0. I was truly the worst player on the team.
But it sounds like you were a pretty fabulous runner.
I love running. My senior year, I was the city champion in the 800. And then just a couple other little things about me growing up is because we didn't have a lot of money, I had a paper out starting at 12 for 4 years, the Examiner. And then I worked with the YMCA as a camp counselor for four summers. The YMCA in San Francisco and Stonestown, and then the Peninsula Marin had a joint effort down in the Santa Cruz Mountains in La Honda called Camp Jones Gulch. And I would go down there for the summer as a camp counselor with kids from 8 to 12. And I just truly loved doing that.
Any of that experience inform where you went with your career or anything about what you've done?
A little bit in that my mom didn't have the money to pay for me to go to college. I was going to have to pay for myself. So my option was, my only option I felt, unless I went to the JC is, well, I shouldn't say my only option, but the option I chose was to go to San Francisco State. And ironically enough, San Francisco State was closer than any other school I went to growing up from where I grew up, but I eventually moved out at one point during college to live with my brother.
Okay.
And so I knew, I went to San Francisco State as a business major, and I knew I wanted to run there. So I ran track and cross country for 4 years. And my life in college was, I would go to school on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. I would work Tuesday, Thursday, Sunday, 8 hours a day. And then I would run 40 to 60 miles a week.
Wow. And not that numbers are everything, but my understanding is you ran a 411 mile.
I ran a 354 1500, which was my junior year, which is equivalent to about a 411 mile because you don't run the mile in college. And I ran a 152 half, which were both, I was very proud of myself. I had set a goal when I was a freshman. I broke both school records. And I won the conference championship my junior year, which was in Turlock at Stanislaus State for the conference ran. And I finished third as a senior. San Francisco State was a commuter school.
Okay.
So it gave me a sense of belonging. And we had a coach there, our track coach, who was a wonderful role model for me. He was a young first-time head coach, and he was there for 11 years, all 4 years I was there. Very competitive, very much a motivator. We were a Division II non-scholarship school, but we took it very seriously. And my coach, Harry Mara, later on in his career, coached Ashton Eaton to the world record in the decathlon in the 2012 in London, 2016 in Rio, gold medal.
Wow.
In the decathlon.
Wow.
So he was a really good role model for me.
Pivoting to post-college, did you find yourself right out of the gates working in the insurance industry?
Yeah. So I had a memory of an interview with an individual in downtown San Francisco who gave me an informational interview for an hour and a half, who worked at Liberty Mutual.
Okay.
And what really was interesting about it for me was he was explaining to me about trials.
Okay.
And he was explaining that he kind of monitors trials and figures out if he needs to go to some of them. He sometimes goes and watches some of the trials.
Okay.
And so I thought that was very interesting. So what I did was I did some research on different insurance companies because I was interested in becoming a claims adjuster. And I found that Farmers Insurance, where I was interested in working, was a California-based company, and they had an office in San Bruno close to where I lived. And both of those things were important to me in deciding what to do. So I just called the local office. There was no job listing, and I asked for an interview. And I got hired 2 weeks after I graduated from college on June 18th, 1987, and I've been working there ever since.
That kind of brings us, and I have some notes here. I understand you're just about to celebrate your 39th anniversary working claims?
Correct.
And all at Farmers the entire time?
Not only all at Farmers, but all handling litigation in Northern California and now all of California.
Wow.
So I'm kind of a unusual because so many people in claims have left the state. And I've not only stayed here, I've tried to go to all my trials in person, which is pretty cool because I've had the opportunity to do that because I'm not like out of state. And so, I really enjoyed the fact that I was here the whole time.
And we'll get into, I think, some of the ways where, I'm going to say that reasonable minds have differing opinions and how you end up in trial as opposed to resolution. But it sounds like you've had the opportunity to go to over 50 trials in terms of monitoring what's going on.
Well, I've had that many on my own. Also, like, for example, in the last 2 trials I went to a trial last summer for 3 weeks in Marin for one of my coworkers. It was an auto versus bicycle traumatic brain injury case. And she was out of the area, so I'll go to any trial. I'll volunteer to go to any trial because going to mediations and going to trials is brings me joy and happiness the most out of anything I do in my job. I'm just kind of like a nerd. Okay. And then the trial before that was another one of my coworkers, and it was in the Martinez courthouse, and I was there for 3 weeks watching an auto accident with a back surgery, and whether it was related to the car accident or whether it was something that was not.
So when you describe mediations and trials as being your favorite part of your work, why is that?
Well, when I first started getting involved in litigation, I started at the office handling just property damage claims. But within 9 months of this office in San Bruno that I was working at, I was given a tremendous opportunity to take on all sorts of interesting cases in litigation and non-litigation, but mostly in litigation. So I was handling wrongful eviction cases. I have a memory of a construction defect mediation at the Palace Hotel with like 40 parties there. And I'm going, this is crazy. There's 40 parties here, and this is all for this one lawsuit. And I have a memory of being at the courthouse when the Loma Prieta in 1989 earthquake hit in Redwood City, and it was rocking back and forth. It was at the end of we were just about to leave because it happened, I think, at about 5:04. And I have a memory of being in San Francisco, having a wrongful death claim and getting the police report and going to knock on the door. Our insured was a moving company, and the driver was up high and didn't see someone crossing in front in a crosswalk, hit a pedestrian. They were unfortunately passed away. It was a horrible situation. Mm-hmm. And I remember knocking on the door to introduce myself and getting a card from Melvin Belli's office, which I thought was funny.
Wow. Wow.
And then early on in my career at that time, there was something that came out, Jury Verdicts Weekly.
Yeah, I remember that.
And I loved it because it would go over the facts of the case, the lawyers involved, the experts involved, what happened in the verdict, and I would learn like what types of cases were the most likely to go to trial, what types of verdicts were happening, and who was using what experts. And that really got me interested. I like competition, so I like litigation because of the competition aspect of it. My feeling is always, I want to make a fair offer. There's always a difference of opinion about what's fair. And then if I can't resolve it, then I want to try and, if we have to go to trial, because I don't want to go to trial unless we have to. But some cases are no liability cases to me, and maybe I'm forcing the issue. So I'm not trying to say that I don't ever want to go to trial, but it was the competition portion of the trials, and then just being a nerd about how interesting I find them. Even to this day, I just love going to watch trials.
I'm old enough to remember Jury Verdicts Weekly and its blue cover and the way it would show up in the mail, and how that eventually became Verdict Search. Do you still consume that kind of information on a regular basis?
Not like I did then, but I do hear about verdicts, and then I look into them, and also I'm on LinkedIn and I read about some verdicts on that and what happened on that from different people who I follow. Mm-hmm. But I don't get something as specific as Jury Verdicts Weekly, and I really like that publication.
Yeah, I miss the way it was. So those used to be passed around the office.
Yes,
and I miss the way it was far easier to, when it was in print to hold on to and find.
Right.
So as a young claims adjuster, can you describe what it was like to start making decisions about cases and working with defense lawyers? And because my questions have too many questions within the question, Was Farmers all in-house at that time? Were you dealing with in-house people as attorneys, or were you managing outside people too?
So when I started in San Bruno, we had house counsel in the East Bay, but we did not have house counsel on the peninsula in San Jose.
Okay.
So there was a couple of defense firms, the Ropers Majeski and the Clapp Maroney firm I was working on from very early on, and also with outside coverage counsel on different things, and also with in-house. So it was a combination of both that I dealt with. So and I handled the Bay Area at that point, including the East Bay and the peninsula in San Francisco.
Okay. Were there certain lawyers who you ended up working with more frequently?
There were, and also I think one of my jobs when I have a case, one of my jobs is to figure out if the right person's on the case for the exposure and the type of case that it is. You never really know what case is going to go to trial. You have to be prepared. I feel like one of my main jobs is to make sure I have the right attorney based on the facts and the exposure of the case. So I would start getting to know people and then getting to know who I needed to use based on the case and the exposure.
What types of things would you consider when trying to match the right lawyer with the right file?
If I thought it was a possibility of going to trial, obviously it has to go to someone who I have confidence in the case. And so it would have like a formula in my head about like all these different things that I think about, like what's the venue? What are the injuries? Who's the attorney on the other side? What happened in the accident? What type of witnesses do people make? There's all these things I think about, but I get it to the attorney who I have confidence that will do a good job if it goes to trial.
Okay. I know I'm bouncing around a little bit, but I have to follow up on the Melvin Belli piece. Did his office end up taking that case?
Though they did have the case, and it was like a lot of wrongful death claims, it turned out to be a policy limit settlement.
Okay.
I've had one of the things I do now over the last 20 years is I kind of am specifically handling like the highest exposure cases, including wrongful death and traumatic brain injuries and other types of claims like that. And so a lot of wrongful death claims are policy limits cases, but not all of them are. And I'll give you an example. I had an auto versus bicycle wrongful death claim. It was on the peninsula. It was a horrible accident involving a 12-year-old girl, I believe. I don't remember exactly. And both sides agreed that there was questions about who was at fault. It was not a clear 100% either way. And so on that case, we went to mediation. I always try to mediate cases if I can. I'll try and settle them myself, but if I need to, and a lot of cases need to go to mediation, and this one did. And so we went to mediation. I met the parents, and it was very emotional, and they were wonderful people. I made the decision after we talked about all the things with the mediator for almost 3 hours. And on that particular case, and defense counsel was there too, but ultimately I'm the one who decides what we settle a case for, what money we put up on a case it's my job. And I just made the decision in that case to make one offer because I thought it would have been really hard for them to go back and forth because really they're thinking about the legacy of their kid, what they want to do about that legacy, and still feel like they've had their peace of mind about being treated fairly. And so after about 3 hours, I made one offer, and I told them that was the only offer I was going to make that day because sometimes in mediations, I try never to do the same thing. I try to keep an open mind depending on the case and what needs to be done. And in this case, I felt that the best thing to do was just to make one offer, and then about an hour and a half later, they came back and accepted it. And so, sometimes I just try and think outside the box as much as possible and do what I think is best to get the case resolved.
I don't want to make presumptions about what our listeners know and don't know in this process. I think some of the people who listen to the podcast are very experienced and some are less so. And I think there may be some people who don't understand that decision-making behind the scenes, what you just described. That is the claims adjuster who ultimately is making the decision on value.
That is my job. It's not defense counsel or anyone else's job. It's my job to figure out what I think the case is worth. And it's my job to do a good job of going through all the medical records and the other things I need to do to have a feeling about it. I have instincts as far as liability goes and facts and who the attorneys involved on the other side are. I think everything has to go into the equation. It's nothing that the company tells me. It's my experience and wisdom and just figuring it out and coming up with numbers of what I think cases are worth.
I want to play with this for a little bit, if that's okay. I think that there are a lot of lawyers, there was a time when everyone talked about Colossus, if you remember that back in the day. And there are a lot of lawyers who have this sense that it's almost actuarial on the other side, that certain things are fed into a computer, and the computer, based on venue and economic damages, et cetera, spits out a number, and the adjuster may have a little bit of range to move it up and down, but otherwise there's not a lot there. And so I'd love for you to help us understand on your side how you see it that is different than that perception.
Well, I only can speak for myself. I'm not going to speak for other things going on.
Yes.
For myself, I don't use any type of system, except I will sometimes use a system to determine if the medical bills are reasonable and customary for the area where they are, but nothing about general damages.
Yeah.
And it's just to get an idea. I mean, there's so much lien-based treatment going on right now, Miles, in California. In the last 5 years, it's kind of like completely taken over the landscape, especially in Southern California, because when I switched over for 10 years, I handled just strict litigation for 5 counties up Marin, Sonoma, Mendocino, Lake, and Humboldt. And all I did was litigation.
Yeah.
And I had six attorneys up there that I had so much confidence in, and we would go to trial 3, 4, 5 times a year. And I had a manager who had confidence in the decisions, and it would give me the okay to do that on the right cases. The last 20 years, I've been handling claims in all of Northern California because we became more specialized. Auto claims. When I first started out, I also did business, but we have those separated.
Okay.
And now in the last 7 years, I handle all of California, and especially in Southern California right now, but it's not just there. The huge increase in lien-based treatment and just constant policy limit demands sent out.
You're preaching to the choir on this topic. And while normally this is a Q&A, here's a piece that I've found to be challenging on this landscape. We do not engage in lien-based care. I see situations where there is a client who may not have money, where some care may be helpful. The flip side, though, is where you see a lot of lien-based care, and these are my opinions, and they are the opinions of Cooper's, that the carrier's reliance on economic damages, and not you personally, but carriers have intimated that they believe in economic damages, but on the non-economic damages side, it's much harder to get value there. That's our perception on the plaintiff side. So when it became clear that economic damages would drive value, and the Howell numbers got cut because of the way the Howell decision came out, it felt to me like there was almost like tax policy. It forced people to try and be creative in coming up with bigger economic damages numbers. And that's where this lien-based care has erupted, I would say, like a boil, because I don't think it's good for the industry.
There's a lot of different reasons why this could happen, but I guess my number one thing is just how much I've seen it explode. Yeah. Specifically, the most common case I see is it's a clear liability accident. They have an attorney from the very beginning. They go to a chiropractor. Within 3 weeks or so, they're ordering MRIs, which is really early in a case to order MRIs. Then they're getting referred to pain management. They're getting injections, and the injections are costing between $10,000 and $20,000 per injection, including the surgery center. And then they're get a doctor who says that they're a surgical candidate. That's the most common cases that I'm seeing.
From my perspective, if that person truly is a surgical candidate, that's fine. And if they are not, and it's being done to drive the value in the case, that's awful.
Well, and that's my job to figure out which ones I think are legitimate and which ones we have to fight.
Yeah.
I mean, that's part of what I have to do.
Yeah. I have to imagine, while you might now be statewide, that if you're primarily dealing with death and traumatic brain injury cases, that there may be less of that piece going on in kind of the day-to-day, the large exposure cases that you're handling now.
Yes, but if there's an exposure, because when I look at cases and when cases get assigned to me, it's based on exposure. So we can't assume it there, even if it looks like liability is questionable, we still need to have it assigned to someone who has more experience, so that if there's a surgical recommendation, that it gets looked at in that case. And even in traumatic brain injury cases, there's so many different types of traumatic brain injury cases, and I have to make a decision on those cases on which ones. And it also will depend on the type of coverage we have, of course, as well as the exposure. And I'll give you an example. About 18 years ago, I had a horrible litigated file down in Santa Clara involving a student at Santa Clara University. She was crossing the street, and our insured hit her, and she had a really horrible brain injury, which was going to take her out of college, have her move back home with her mom. Her mom was going to have to stop working to take care of her. And I knew it. I'm not saying I'm always right, but I have an instinct of when we have, based on my experience and reviewing the records, that this was a really, really bad accident within the litigation. And we were a co-defendant with a public entity where there was an accusation that the crosswalk, the light did not give her enough time to cross.
Okay.
And so I have to protect our insured. That's my number one job at all times. We have to protect our insured. And so they didn't want the plaintiff attorney did not want an empty chair at trial. And so we reached an agreement with them, a covenant not to execute, so that we would agree to go to trial, but that our insured would not be exposed over their limits.
Okay.
And I think 9 out of 10 times in this case, maybe more, we would have defensed it, but there was just too much exposure. And I felt the case was worth between $10 and $15 million. That was my feeling.
Yeah.
And the verdict came in at $18 million. The brain injury cases, there are some that are worth a lot, and there's others that are, I don't want to say manufactured because that's not a fair word, but that you have to look at very closely and determine if they really truly had a traumatic brain injury.
More subjective.
Yes, but there's things you can look at, like the Glasgow Coma score, what happened in the emergency room. There's so many things I look at from early on to determine if I think that they potentially had a brain injury claim or not. And then also some of the treaters that they have later on, if they didn't have treatment for 6 months or 8 months, and then they all of a sudden have, like, there's a big thing that's come out, like, and I might not be saying it right, but a DTI MRI.
Yeah.
Those are controversial about whether or not they're meant to be used for treatment.
Yeah. And
so, yeah, I think out of any type of case, the traumatic brain injury goes from all over the scale of which ones are very objective and which ones are more less so.
As I got more experienced on intakes in terms of talking to potential new clients, typically within 15 seconds to about 2 minutes, I could figure out not what the true value of the case was, but whether there was a there and how it was going to traject. So that's a lead into my question for you. On the valuation side, from a kind of gut instinct on value, how long into a case is that showing up for you?
It could be right away. I've had just cases I got earlier this week where a bicyclist hurt and various objective injuries right away. I know that's a really bad loss. So it can change at any time during the case, because until a case becomes litigated, I don't control what information I'm given. So if I have the police report or other information to tell me about it, or I have an opportunity to talk to the individual if they're not represented, or if they are represented, their attorney, and I can get more information, plus speaking to our insured. So I kind of feel like it could be any time, and it could be 3 years into a case that someone all of a sudden has a surgery that could change the evaluation. So it could be a day or two, it could be 3 years down the line. It changes on every single case. That's kind of like what makes the job so interesting, is that it's never the same.
In that regard, And these are some, whether they're myths or truths. I have the opportunity to chat with you about some things like setting reserves. There is a belief on the plaintiff side that we want to make sure, whether we're in litigation or not, that we want to get as much information as we can to a carrier and an adjuster early in the process so that they can set reserves appropriately. Because once reserves get set, it's very hard to move that number. Is any of that realistic?
So I would have two answers for that. The first part is, the earlier we get information, the earlier we can look at things and try and make an offer to try and resolve the case. I believe it's in your client's best interest to, at least if they have that information. I'm not saying that you have to take the offer, but that, in my opinion, is the earlier you get us information, earlier, because ultimately what my goal is to settle every case I can. And again, I make the caveat that I have certain cases on liability that if I feel strongly about, then and then if I don't believe the treatment is related or the surgery is related. And then the answer to the second part of your question, I set reserves based on the information I have. But if I get new information, I'm going to change the reserve based on information I get.
Okay.
Anytime I get new information, I want to evaluate that immediately and update my evaluation.
Okay.
So if someone doesn't get us information right away, but they have a really good case and we get a bunch of case later on, I have to change my aspect based on the new information, update my evaluation, and it ultimately could change my views on the case, obviously.
In a parallel track, if you had your dream plaintiff's counsel, I guess would be the way to put it, in terms of the information that you're getting and the speed at which you're getting it, what would you like to get for you to have everything you need to be able to make a good evaluation on a case? And when?
As soon as possible. I mean, a lot of people want to wait for demands to send everything all at once, but as soon as possible for me. And the other thing that's very helpful is to get the pre-accident medical records.
Okay.
Because those are so important for me. And if it goes in the litigation, we're going to subpoena those records anyway.
Why? Why are those important to you?
Because if someone's has a report that someone, for example, a surgical candidate, let's just use an example, they need neck surgery. I want to look at the 5 years or years of records before the accident to see if they had any other treatment or any other thing in the records would indicate, did they have an MRI done? Did they have treatment? Did they have injections? Was there anything else going on in their medical history? Because it's going to change. It's going to be important for me to properly evaluate the case.
There are some lawyers, again, on the plaintiff side, who have opinions about pre-litigation statements. Is a statement something that you feel is absolutely essential, or is it something that is nice to have, or is it a don't really care, I can make my evaluation without that?
Statements can at times be very important if it's a liability situation.
Can you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah, so I recently had well, it's been going on for a long time, but it's a wrongful death claim involving someone who was at our house and was on a horse, and our insured was not there. So without their statement of what happened, it's very hard for me to know, to properly evaluate what in my mind happened in that case. So there are it's in liability situations where it's very important for me so I have a better understanding of what happens.
Thank you for listening, and please join us next week as we continue this conversation. Please email us at podcast@coopers.law with questions, comments, feedback, and suggestions for who we should have on the show. Like what you heard? Share us with a colleague and leave us a 5-star review on your podcast platform of choice. To all of you doing justice out there, happy hunting.